I just wanted to say again how great it is to be here with all of you. On staff, we've talked a bit that we were only willing to give one Holy Week and one Christmas to COVID, and that was enough. And so here we are. We're fortunate to be both at this address with the facilities that we have, but also in this part of the country where we have responded better than some. So thank you for being here. And we are just ecstatic to be able to do this. I wanted to talk about tonight's reading in two chapters, so to speak. When we start, one of the things that I think is important is that these are the words we read every year. So we have 2 Christmas stories out of 4 Gospels. 2 of the Gospels have no Christmas account of any kind, really. 2 of them then have them. You'll notice that in tonight's we have baby Jesus and we have shepherds, but we do not have baby Jesus and wise men. That is Matthew, that is not Luke. And you would think, hey, wouldn't it be smart to alternate those every year? Except Luke showed up that day and when they were making that decision, and so he's the only one we read. We read that one every year. So if you're wondering why this guy Quirinius sounds so familiar, it's because for 2,000 years we've been talking about him on Christmas Eve. When we hear this reading, one of the things that becomes important is to understand where this lands in history and kind of the political backdrop to this. You'll notice the reading starts with all of this name dropping. We have Emperor Augustus. We have Quirinius being governor of Syria. We have all these big names being dropped that are planting this in a point in history. But the story gets deeper as we move through it. I think we start to think of Christmas through our own lens, wondering if our favorite sweater is clean before we head to church or not. Did it get stored somewhere? We're worried about the food and whether that's ready, and did I get everything lined up, or do we have to stop at the store? There's a lot of things in our mind that make us think that going to Bethlehem is kind of like maybe getting an Airbnb for the weekend, and Mary and Joseph, they just want to get out of town for a little bit, and we lose some of the scandal and tragedy that is this story. Emperor Augustus demanded that everyone be registered, that everyone be documented and counted. The purpose of that was because the empire needed taxes to fuel the army and the machinery that was the Roman Empire. This was not a voluntary trip. When you're 8+ months pregnant, you don't choose to wander through the countryside for days and days and days on foot, returning to some ancestral homeland of Joseph where he apparently doesn't know anybody, right? Because they go back to his ancestral home, and even for a young woman who is pregnant, there is not even, as my grandfather might say, a shirt-tail relative to take them in, right? This was not a journey that was voluntary. This was a forced journey by outside imperial forces demanding that they move, that they be counted, that they be taxed. In the midst of all that, we're mindful as to how fringe they are in the empire. This is not suburban Rome. This is not even suburban Jerusalem, which is a long ways from being suburban Rome. They are from the hill country, way to the north. They go at great lengths to Bethlehem, where it comes time for their child to be born. Then what do we get? We don't get more proper officials coming through to make sure that names are spelled correctly for the birth certificate, that we can start getting those social security numbers geared up and all of this kind of business, right? This is very fringe. A stable, right? Stables, they smell. There's animals in there that you keep in a stable, right? Not in a place where women have children. This is a messy, smelly place at the edge of things. And then who comes? The shepherds, who nobody thinks of even at the edge, because they're beyond the edge, as Elizabeth was commenting on. And even if we start to steal from Matthew's reading a little bit and bring in the wise men, religious leaders in a fashion, but completely outside of the Jewish circuit. Far to the east, they are traveling outside of the empire and coming in. There is this sense of over and under, the high being over the low and the vulnerable. And last Sunday, we heard Mary's Magnificat, this idea of turning things upside down, that the high would be brought low and the low would be lifted up. It's interesting when we come and gather to this day. On Sunday, it will be 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. We think of these high who are brought low. Now, pivoting a bit to this idea of all of this forced action, this imperial action, the birth of Christ at the fringe of the world in some ways. I'm reminded then, as we move into the second part of my sermon, about the business of God coming among us, not as Superman, not as like the 10-foot tall Roman warrior to sort everybody out, but comes as a baby. I know what you need. You need a baby, right? How many problems have you had in the last week where you thought, if I had a baby, that would just solve everything? Not a thing. I remember when I was about 19 or 20 years old, I was visiting Mount Cross, and the directors had just had a baby. And I got out of the car, and I was walking along, and they handed this baby to me. Now, like most 19-year-old boys, I was completely competent holding children. And I remember distinctly this moment because I was unable to walk at that point because I was not confident I could both hold the baby and walk, and felt that it was safer just simply to stand still. But when you think of those things, when a child comes to you, your universe gets radically small really fast, right? It's suddenly all about what is in your two hands. And that is everything. There's not a whole lot of room for other stuff. Now, I've known as a parent, you can get good at this over time and do all kinds of neat tricks that are usually safe. But when we think of this business of being handed God as a child among us, there is a sense that all creation stops to watch, to listen, to be in awe. Now, we think about this image in our nativity sets, right? Many of you probably have a nativity set in your home, and it gets set up, and it's got all of the whole cast of characters, right? We put the shepherds in there and the wise men because even though the wise men don't come for years, it works better if they're there at the same time, right? I remember when I was a kid, my parents had a really nice one that was nicely painted ceramic. And every year this would come out of the garage, and it was in this carefully sealed box, and everything was individually packed, and we'd have to unpack and by we, I mean my mom would unpack these. We were kept at a fairly safe distance from this, and it was put at a level that was out of reach from my brother and I, right? It was put up a little higher to be kept safe, that we could watch from a distance, but it was up high. It was not something close to us. Certainly was not a toy. It was not a thing if I was caught with an element in my hand that it would go well. So it stayed away, which is interesting because at our house we have a ton of nativities, if you know us, and some of them are a little higher up, some of them are a little lower to the ground. But this idea that the nativity is out of our reach, kept away safe, is a little contrary to this image of Jesus coming among us as a child in a stable that is messy with animals. It's very human, messy here and now, right? There was a year when the nativity was being unpacked where baby Jesus in the manger had a rough day. He was placed on the hearth as the figures were going up, and the dog got him. Now, fortunately, it wasn't catastrophic, but Jesus got a little roughed up in the equation there before he was retrieved, and was just never the same after that. But this image of the dog running amok with the baby Jesus seems oddly like the stable scene in some ways, right? This idea that there is this mess that is right there. If we were to go over to the preschool today, you would find on the table in there 4 different Fisher-Price nativity scenes. There's Marys everywhere you turn around. And they are, have been in use for a few years. And so the paint is coming off, and you can tell they have been well loved. They have been handled by lots of children through the years as they have explored and have brought Christ close to them. Sounds kind of like our gospel reading here. God coming among us as one of us, not in Rome, away from everyone, high and exalted and distant, but rather in the mess of this world, in our mess in our lives. In the midst of that, Christ comes, giving us hope and light when the nights seem the longest. Amen.